and they don't really like me. Cause I can fuck your bitch and fuck your mom and auntie.
PlayStation 5,
Speaking of consoles,
Series, Nintendo Switch, stuff that's successful and good and works. But there's way more gaming consoles out there. There's your total failures, the bad consoles, and there's the ones that don't work. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on
gameranx,
the top 30 worst gaming consoles of all time. We're going to start this off with a bang. A console known as the PlayStation 3 controller with a screen on top.
What?
It's a PlayStation 3 controller mold with a tiny screen on top. They took out the sticks, replaced them with speakers, because, you know, great. That's
what?
You couldn't have put the speakers anywhere else. Like, I don't know, maybe you could have put them where the back buttons were, because they took those off too. But
why?
To make up for it, they added 2 new buttons in the middle of the controller. They advertised that this thing has 520 games preloaded in it, which is pretty pathetic compared to the 7 billion games that usually get packed in these cheapo AliExpress bootleg consoles. But hey, at least the price is right. Just $1.78 at time of writing. I've seen these things sell for as low as 99 cents. So hey, it may be a pile of garbage, but it's not going to set you back a whole lot. I love that it advertises it has a direct connection to high-definition television, but doesn't have...
Get the fuck out of here with this bullshit.
It's a 2-color RCA, and it doesn't even have stereo sound. I guess it's not lying. You can connect it to a high-definition TV, which some of them have RCA inputs, so not necessarily your high-definition TV, but a high-definition TV. Sure, the console only outputs an SD, but you can connect it to some HD TVs. Cool. And number 29 is the Ouya, the little indie console that couldn't. The Ouya was a third-party, crowd-funded video game console that was meant to save us from the stranglehold that companies like Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft
Bro, the
had
Ouya
over
was so
industry.
fucking dog
shit. It
shit.
was a console for the people, a new kind of video game console. And the rose was still in bloom for Kickstarter projects at the time, so the money came a-rolling in. More than 9 times the original.
Y'all gotta watch these
People
Kickstarters, yo.
thing, but
They
after
be
years of
scamming
broken
niggas.
promises and mismanagement, the final result was really underwhelming. The thing was primarily sold as an Android console meant for more casual gamers, but the only people who actually got any use out of it were the hardcore enthusiasts who turned it into a low-cost emulation box. And even then, it wasn't great. The controller was cheap and poorly designed. Even for a cheap little console, this thing was extremely underpowered for what it was meant to do. And by the time it actually came out, actual emulation boxes were starting to come out using cell phone CPUs, which were way more powerful than this thing had on offer. So the only real value it had left was that Ouya games had to be free to play, or at least some of the game had to be free to play. Essentially, it meant every game had to have a demo. So that's actually not a bad distribution model. The problem with it is that you had to have an internet connection to play. Every single game was like that, which, as you know, with a good internet connection can be a problem, but the wireless hardware in the Ouya was cheap and spotty, and obviously the servers are down now, so every game on the system has been rendered unplayable. So much for freeing the games. And number 28 is the Apple Bondi Pippin. Apple's first and so far only foray into the world of video game consoles came out back in 1996, costing $599.
The Apple
US
Pippin?
dollars, double that of the Sony PlayStation, which released a year earlier. For that price, this thing better have some impressive graphics for the time, right? Well, no. It didn't even have a dedicated graphics processor. All the games made for the system run like crap and look significantly worse than games made for the PS1. So what did the Pippin have? Well, it had a hideous boomerang controller that was wireless, which was unique for the time, and also you could install Mac OS 7 on it. So it was sort of a hybrid PC console with all the negatives both and none of the positives. If you actually did install the OS, it would take up most of the available system memory and games would run even worse. The few exclusives the system got were completely pointless too. They could just work on a standard Mac, so there was almost no reason to get them.
What the fuck was
the worst-selling console of the 5th generation, which is impressive because there were some pretty big duds during this era. The failure of the console wasn't entirely Apple's fault. The driving force behind the console was mostly Bondi. They were the ones that actually manufactured and marketed it, so they ate most of the losses when it inevitably flopped, while Apple pushed forward, pretending the whole thing never happened.
Yeah, but
and number 27 is the Nintendo
so Apple won't take more of the
Boy,
fucking
probably
blame for it.
Nintendo's most high-profile flop. The Virtual Boy was meant to be their big follow-up to the success of the Game Boy. So instead of taking the super popular handheld, making a few improvements and calling it a day,
The Virtual Boy was some bullshit.
This abomination that is only technically portable. I mean, you really can only barely call this portable. It has a terrible controller, only 22 games, and most importantly, it gives you a searing headache using it for more than
This was
5
like the
minutes.
first VR
The
headset
display
for
it
real.
put out was only red and black with a mixed parallax effect. And that was
Like how
virtual
VR
reality.
games is
I
popping
mean,
off now. This was like
on
the
some
first
level,
one.
the
This
red
shit is
was
fucking
kinda
ass.
cool, but not the way that they used it because it just didn't work. It'd be cool as a theme on like a Game Boy emulator, but not as this. I will say there were 1 or 2 decent games on there. The Wario game on the console is legitimately good, but man, everything else about it is just so horribly misjudged. Nintendo is usually on point with its controllers, but this one sucks. Like, it's got this cable
That
that comes out
controller
of
is
the top
ass.
in a weird way. It's got this big block of a battery that can easily
That I'm a
fall out
fucking
with only
Nintendo
little bit of
64
pressure.
fan,
It's
and I know that
nonsense.
controller is ugly,
Wearing
but
this thing
this
was
shit is
awkward.
fucking.
It was really heavy, so it made
This
your
shit
neck
is
hurt.
terrible.
And if you use the included stand, then you'd awkwardly have to hunch over a table or something to see anything. This thing was such a piece of crap that not even a Nintendo brand could get people to buy it. It sold less than 1 million units and was discontinued in less than a year. And number 26 is the Game Gear Micro, otherwise known as that thing that destroys your eyes because you're straining so damn hard to use it. The console, the Game Gear Micro, was an absurd Japan-only series of tiny versions of the Game Gear. And when I say tiny, I mean extremely small. They're less than 4 centimeters tall. The screen is half
Yeah,
that.
that's just
And
for like
I guess probably about as tiny
collecting
as you
for
could
real.
make a handheld game console.
You're
and
not
still
really
have
playing
it be
that.
theoretically playable. You would have to be a madman to try to play this thing. I look at how tiny the screen is. I hope you have a microscope handy or don't mind holding it directly in front of one of your eyeballs. Seriously, you have to have it really close to your face to have a chance of seeing any of this, especially if you're playing one of the RPGs these things inexplicably came packed with. The funny thing is, it's not a poorly made device or anything. It's a funny little novelty, but actually trying to use it to play games for real is all but impossible. And to make matters worse, Sega cheaped out and made it so that each version only had 4 games total. They could have easily packed the entire Game Gear catalog onto one of these things, but no, you get 4. I guess it doesn't really matter. I mean, 4 games, 400 games, it's not really a big difference on a device that you're really only buying for novelty. But they could have made it literally a couple of centimeters larger and made it so you could play it on more than like a technical basis. And number 25 is the Philips CDI. Released back in 1991, this console was meant to
Philips
be a lot of
CDI
fun
was some
and
bullshit,
ended up
too.
being nothing. It was going to be a home computer, a video player, a CD player, a video game console, and it was going to be all that in one.
Early 90s, they
thing.
was really trying to
One
elevate
big,
consoles, and they was
crappy
really
package.
figuring some shit
Named
out.
after the disc
It's a lot of
format
bullshit.
Philips developed that was meant to rival Sony's compact disc. The system is mostly known today for 2 things: its embarrassing FMV games and the laughably bad Legend of Zelda CDI games, which were made as part of the deal that Nintendo made with Philips, mostly done to spite Sony. For a 1991 console, this thing could do some impressive things. It could even connect to the internet, at least in Britain, but the PC side of the console was really undercooked, and the gaming part, well, you know what the gaming part looks like. You're looking at it. It was just embarrassing most of the time. Not every game on the console was unplayably bad, but there was more junk than not. There really was a lot of junk made for this thing.
This shit
and
was
just
some
bottom of
bullshit.
the barrel trash. It cost $700 at launch, and that's
$700
$1991.
for that?
Translated in today's money, it's more than double. It's $1,600. What did you get? Well, to paraphrase Bill Gates, it was a terrible game machine and a terrible PC. When you're right, you're right. And that billionaire dork was right. And number 24 is the Zeebo. Bad name right off. Released exclusively
The
in
Zeebo.
Brazil in 2009, this console was
What the
meant
fuck?
to serve the growing middle class with a less expensive gaming option, compared to the extremely expensive imported first-party consoles that only the rich could afford. It was a noble idea, but the whole thing ended up being a flop. It was outdated before it even came out, the controller was bad, and the games were mostly ports of phone games or shovelware slop. Even though it was designed as a cheaper alternative console, it was still too expensive for a lot of Brazilian
What
fans,
is
so it
that?
sold
What-
poorly.
what-
So
what
even
is
with the
that?
price cuts that came months later, this thing never ended up being profitable. About 40 games came out for it, including noteworthy titles like Resident Evil 4's phone version, which, by the way,
Wow.
plays much better on a phone. And that's bad, but Ridge Racer was worse. It didn't just play poorly, it could, no joke, actually kill the console. According to a comment by
What?
Rafamata, The game would leak data into the memory, which would fill up and corrupt the memory, breaking the entire Zeebo OS.
What the fuck?
Game-breaking bugs, not console-breaking bugs. Like, I can't
It'll
remember
break the
any
whole
other
console?
besides the Xbox 360, which that was all fixed. That could just be bricked. And the Xbox 360 was from overheating. This is just software that
Yo, playing a wrong game will literally brick it. Nah, that's crazy as
fuck.
fuck.
List of bad consoles when number 23 is the end gauge. Colloquially
Oh yeah,
known
Frank,
as
you pull
the
this out.
taco,
I'm going to
you
fuck
know,
home.
because the awkward placement of the speaker and the microphone made it look like you were talking into a taco. This thing was a handheld console and a telephone all wrapped up into one. A phone that
The
can play
Nokia
games.
nigga gauge.
Get out of town with that. What? Obviously, this thing came out in 2003, and although, like, some phones could play some very rudimentary games at that point, the Nokia Taco was, in a lot of ways, actually way ahead of its time. It had Bluetooth. You could go online with it. It had MP3 playback. It could do pretty much everything a cell phone at the time could possibly do, while also being a dedicated gaming handheld. It's a good idea, but the execution was fatally flawed. Look at it. The
Shit.
face buttons double.
It's a good phone, but like,
and it's
a good phone, but a
awkward
shitty ass
to say
game
the least.
console.
The
Pretty
screen was
much.
weirdly narrow for a handheld, and if you actually wanted to insert a game, you had to remove
And the screen and the
battery.
controls is ass.
The game card slot was behind the battery, similar to how most phones worked back then, but instead of swapping out SIM cards, instead of that, you were basically swapping out micro SDs all the time. Like, you put one in and it stayed there until you took the battery out. It made zero sense for a handheld console.
Wow.
Nokia had no clue what they're doing. It sucked as a handheld and it sucked ass as a phone. It did actually have a pretty cool
damn.
Metal Gear game on
It was worse as a phone.
Not vital to play or anything. I would go with an emulator rather than
Just
digging
throw the
up
whole
one
shit
of the
away.
fabled tacos. But it shows off that despite its many flaws, it actually did a pretty good job with graphics, shockingly enough. Just everything else about it was wrong. It's not even that it didn't work, it was just wrong. At number 22 is the ZX Spectrum Vega Plus, a Kickstarter failure that makes the likes of the Atari VCS and the Intellivision Amico seem carefully planned and professional in comparison. Getting into the
This
nitty-gritty of
just looked like a
particular
fake
disaster would
console.
take all day. So let's just talk about the console itself. All
That
of it
shit
supposedly
just looked
was
fake.
a handheld version of the previously released mini console ZX Spectrum Revival. The thing that drew heavy criticism was its build quality, but backers hoped these guys would get it together and put out a quality product this time. There's actually a pretty big fan base for Sinclair microcomputers in the UK. It's a nostalgic brand for a lot of people, so the promise of a high-quality handheld that was preloaded with 1,000 classic Spectrum games was something a lot of people wanted. However, the final product was not what anyone wanted. After struggling for years to stay afloat and weathering many self-made disasters, they finally managed to release a few of the Vega Pluses, even if it was way lower than the original expected run of about 400 units. The handhelds that people did get were in terrible shape. They were flimsy and cheap, relied on batteries, and had no charging cable. A lot of the release handhelds people got were straight up broken, with faulty ports or bad batteries. Even the boxes they came in were slapdash. Instead of proper packages, a lot of them came loose in boxes with nothing protecting them other than some crumpled up paper. Oh yeah, and those 1,000 games, they got cut down to just 14 when they lost the license to Spectrum's game library. The entire
Nah.
thing was a shit show, and the only reason
That's
they
crazy.
released it was because I think it would have been fraud if they didn't. At number 20,
Getting promised 1,000 games and you get the console and there's only 14 on it. Nah, that's
one
wild.
is the Sega Genesis Flashback. Anyone remember those at-games consoles you used to see all over the place? People let the crap quality of those things slide back when nobody really cared about miniature consoles, but when the NES Classic came out, expectations changed. People wanted more mini consoles, and they wanted ones that were well made. But we didn't get that with the Sega Genesis Flashback. Instead, we got a borderline bootleg piece of crap that barely ran the games it came packaged with.
I think the only
wireless
mini
controllers
console I
it
got
came
is
with used
PlayStation 1.
infrared rather than Bluetooth, which was ubiquitous by the time this thing came out, and infrared is terrible. And a lot of the 80 included games weren't even actual Genesis games. They were knockoffs produced by At Games. I often see people knock this thing, but I bought one when it came out. I didn't know what happened to my Sega Genesis, and it seemed like this would be a good way to, play it. But I booted up Sonic the Hedgehog and was introduced with off-key music. Yes, lots of the games on this console play the music out of key. It's a real piece of junk. Also, it
crazy.
only supported mono
That's terrible.
sound for some reason and didn't really look like a Sega Genesis. It was vaguely reminiscent of the refreshed console design that they went with later in the console's life cycle. But the point of the mini console was, nostalgia, right? It should probably look like a Genesis. After this thing failed, Sega dumped At Games and switched over to M2 to make their next mini console, which was way better received. Moving on to number 20, it's the Super Wonder Boy. I know almost nothing about this thing. There's very little information on the
Super
internet
Wonder
outside
Boy?
of a short blurb on Hardcore Gaming 101, but that's all the information I need to put it on this list. This bootleg Korean console.
All right, this
has
is not
a
real,
silly
bro.
name
Come
and
on.
a unique feature, an alarm clock that goes off every 30 minutes of play. Doesn't that sound like fun?
This is
You
not
play the
real.
game and suddenly the console starts beeping. Happens every 30
This is
minutes.
not
I
fucking
forgot when I
real.
turned this thing on. I guess it was done because some kind of epilepsy scare was going on in 1993. Not related to that episode of Pokemon that triggered epilepsy in a bunch of kids in 1997. That was another thing at a completely other time. I don't really know anything else about the console, but it's so much in terms of a bad console. Like, in the intro of this video, I kind of nebulously said bad. This was what I was alluding to. It's not a failure and it's not non-functional, at least from what we know. But an alarm that goes off every 30 minutes, like, I don't know, to track how long you're playing a game, sounds like frickin' torture. I feel like every single time it would happen, it would just piss me off. I would die a little inside, but also be very agitated. Like, it's bad enough when some Nintendo games tell you to take a break after like an hour. Imagine that, but every 30 minutes, and instead of a little text box, you get the alarm clock sound. At number 19 is the Zone 3D. This 2011 bootleg console looks like a PlayStation 3. It has two controllers that look like Wiimotes. And last, but certainly not least, it has
What?
two anaglyph 3D glasses. Yes, it's a
What
3D
is
console.
this?
It comes packed with 20 3D games, all of which use pre-rendered graphics.
I never heard of this.
Anaglyph 3D is the real cheap, real crappy kind of 3D. The kind where you have the red and blue in the glasses. It looks
Ugh.
terrible. It kind of hurts your eyes to look at. And even when it kind of works, it's not, like, good. I'll say this. At least the 3D
I remember seeing
glasses
I remember
with this
seeing the
console
fucking
were plastic. They're better than the paper ones they used to
the
give out
Spy
all the
Kids
time,
3D movie like
when
that.
I was a kid, which, Lord, that's going to have a lot of you side-eyeing me in terms of
with
age.
them glasses. Yeah, with them glasses. I remember seeing the fucking Spy Kids 3D movie with like that shit.
Graphics that give you
I
a
hated that
headache.
shit.
This is the console for you. There are 80 other non-3D games in the package, but they're all junk too. It's all junk. You'd be better flushing the $60 retail price down the toilet. At least looking at that wouldn't give you a headache. And number 18 is Tiger Game Com. It's the N-Gage, but worse. It tried to be some kind of hybrid between a Game Boy and a PDA. It was absolutely terrible at both
What?
of those functions, though. What makes this thing so bad, other than the stupid name and terrible ergonomic design, is the screen. It's ungodly, it's poorly lit, it ghosts like crazy, and when it's ghosting, the image is just, it's smeared to hell and back. They managed to get some big names on this thing, like Resident Evil 2 and
Oh,
Duke
this
Nukem
screen
3,
is
but
terrible.
games can't be played. They're just a
Oh,
bloody
this
mess of
screen
gray
is
pixels.
terrible.
This thing
Whoa.
seriously has some of the worst graphics I've ever seen. Like, it's abysmal how bad this screen is. There's only about 20 games that ever came out on it, and it's 20 games too many, because look at this slop. What developer in their right mind would look at this and go, yeah, that's the platform for me. I'm going to spend years of my life making a game for this. And the games are total garbage, but hey, at least you can connect to the internet. Yeah, well, if you don't mind attaching it to a modem, there's no Wi-Fi. And you can only view text, which, that's what everybody does on the internet. Like, who asked for this? If you ever wanted
Terrible,
to
yo.
experience what it's like to suffer from glaucoma,
It's fucking
or maybe
ass.
something worse than what people with glaucoma see, get the Gamecom, because, man, it's that. And number 17 is the Commodore 64 games
Fucking
system.
ass.
No, I am not talking about the Commodore 64 microcomputer. I'm talking about the game system, the ill-fated console version that came out back in 1990 and managed to sell a total of 2,000 units. Yes, 2,000. Not 200,000, not 20,000, 2,000.
Only selling
The
2,000
Commodore 64
consoles is
was a
crazy.
staple of the UK game scene, was hugely popular as an affordable PC, but Commodore wanted to compete with Nintendo and Sega, so they put this thing out. It looked like the standard Commodore, but instead
Commodore.
of a keyboard, there's nothing.
Who the
It's a
fuck is
keyboard
even
and keys,
Commodore?
Which is kind of a
Nigga said they was trying to
problem
compete with
with
Nintendo and Sega.
And, well, let's
Who
just
the
say
fuck is
you
this
have to
nigga?
press keys in that game to properly play it. I don't even know how you make that mistake, but it illustrates the fundamental problem with this thing. It's just a Commodore 64 that can't play the vast majority of the games built for the system. It's fundamentally a Commodore 64, that's what it is, except for it's designed without the apparatus
Get out of here.
necessary to play most of the games the Commodore 64 had. It wasn't even a lot cheaper than the main one. It was only $50 less than the full microcomputer, so it really had no reason to exist. At number 16 is Batman. It's a Nintendo 64 box with an Xbox console, 2 PlayStation 1 controllers, a light gun, and art stolen from the Batman and
What
Robin
is this,
movie.
bro?
You know, the one that was widely considered to have killed the Batman franchise until they tried again like more than a decade later with
What?
Batman Begins. Oh, and also it's a family.
What is this, bro?
Meaning that it is a Nintendo
The Batman
Entertainment System
family.
inside.
What
the
is this, bro?
original Xbox.
This is an
that
actual
has different
fucking.
colors and the PlayStation controllers and the light guns. I mean, the light guns seem like a no-brainer. Sorry, if it's got NES games, I am playing Duck Hunt. But beyond the fact that it includes a light gun for Duck Hunt, I assume, nothing about it makes sense. It raises so many questions that'll never be properly answered. There's no point
What
in
the
trying to figure
fuck?
it out. It's Batman. Seriously, look at this box.
Batman.
I have no idea why this is the box.
Batman.
At number 15 is PX 3600.
Two Ts.
Is it an Xbox 360? Is it an Xbox original? Is it a PlayStation kind of? Who knows? It's the PX 3600.
All right, see. All right, we get into the goofy shit now.
No less than 30.
We get into the goofy shit on our list now. Because what the fuck is this, bro? This is some bootleg ass, fake ass shit.
Times each. Well, at least the controllers rumble, or one of the controllers has rumble. Here's a positive for you. It's got stereo RCA cables, so you get 2-channel audio with this one. You can't trust anything about this system, even the game names. Street Fighter is actually Super C. Teletubbies is actually Mario Brothers.
What?
Duck Hunt is split into 2 games. It's a big old mess. There are so many bootleg consoles practically identical to this thing, but its ridiculous name and bizarre design make it noteworthy enough to show up on
The
this
Soldier
list.
Boy console should
And number 14 is
100%
the
should be on this
Power Player
list.
Super Joy 3. Okay, one more bootleg console, but I will say,
Bro,
this
what is
special
up with
this
these
one.
fake
It
ass
is
shits?
everywhere. The stable of swap meets and cheapo junk stores for years. If you got a bootleg console of some kind, it was probably one of this one or its derivatives. I got to bask in the glory of this box here for a second. Nintendo 64 controller, messed up buttons though. 6-button Genesis controller, and the gun packed in. Star Wars in the middle too. The text that says the original new addition. What?
What?
Aside,
How
it's
is-
not the original
how?
If it's a new
It's
edition.
all right.
It's pure magic. The stick
How
on
is
the
it
Nintendo 64
original?
console doesn't even work. It's completely non-functional. Like the 3600, it's got 100 multiples of the same game. So the actual number of games packed into this one is 76. And to top everything off, they're prone to overheating, and the soft plastic actually has the potential to melt. That's right, a mediocre
What?
3D print is more durable than this thing. At number 13 is the GameWave Family Entertainment System.
Oh my
While
God,
it's maybe not
bro.
the
This
worst
list is
console of
fucking
all
funny.
time, it takes its top spot as the lamest console of all time. Made by Zappit Games and released in 2005.
What is
thing
this?
Never had 13 games made for it, and they're boring. Family trivia type games.
It's a trivia. It's a console for trivia game. This is a real thing. Who the fuck?
Had 13 games made for it, and they're boring. Family trivia type games or basic puzzle type games, not good ones. And let's be honest, this thing's barely.
Who is playing
It's
this?
more of a DVD player with some interactive elements and 4 controllers, which are just remotes with different colors. If you have
Or-
no strict Christian
Or you can pull the Nintendo Wii out. The fuck? Why was? Come on,
parents,
yo.
you might have had this thing because it seems like that's the only demographic it found any success in. Imagine it's 2005.
This
you
was
want an
definitely some
Xbox,
old head
and you
shit.
see what can only be a game console box under the tree. You stay up all night imagining all the cool games you're gonna play on your brand new.
Yo,
Super
getting this
Xbox
for Christmas is
360, only to wake up.
getting
in
this
the
on
morning and find
Christmas
out
as a
Santa
kid, yo.
didn't get you an Xbox with Call of Duty 2. It got you the GameWave.
Yo, if I would have got this, yo.
Yellow tape around his body. It's a fucking homicide. His face on a t-shirt and his family traumatized. I didn't even need a shoot him. He just called me by surprise.
Family Family Entertainment System with the VeggieTales Veg Out Family Tournament game, which is, by the way, from what I can tell, some kind of ironically unholy combination of VeggieTales
this is wild.
and DVD menus.
It's a console
Seriously,
for
that's the best I can
fucking
describe
trivia
the gameplay I looked
games,
up.
yo.
And number 12 is the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer, or the 3DO for short. This 1993 console was, in some ways, a leap forward in technology. Could render textured
Panasonic?
graphics natively a year before
Panasonic tried to do a console?
But the price tag killed the thing stone dead before it had a chance to take off. Was $700 in 1993.
Y'all
which is better
niggas
than
is
$700
tripping.
in 1991.
$700?
You know, like the Philips CDI. You know, the CDI and the 3DO really make me wonder about luxury products. Like, is the point of buying them to be able to say you bought a $700 game console in 1993 or one? Because it's not the games. Like, having those games is not the point. Those suck. But anyway, the 3DO only had one game on launch day. The only game that was ready,
It only had one
to come out was Crash and Burn. It just
Yo,
wasn't
dog.
ready for prime time.
Yo, dog. It's $700, and it only has one game.
Struggled to get any traction, and the only games getting made for it were mostly ports of PC and arcade games and a whole lot of FMV garbage, like the truly embarrassing Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. The system did eventually get some good games, even if pretty much all of them were available elsewhere, but it never justified the inflated price tag, and the PlayStation 1 ate its lunch when it came out in 1995. And number 11 is the Advanced Game Player. It's a Nintendo DS
Ooh.
with a calculator screen and a directional pad.
What the
It looks
fuck
like it
is...
came off
Bro, what is... What is this?
a remote control. A very cheap pile of off-white plastic with only 8 games on it, but for some reason, if you wanted to access them,
What?
you had to
This shit
put
is so
a card into the
ugly!
active slot, so you couldn't just play any of the games you wanted. No, there wasn't anything actually stored on these cards. All of the games were pre-installed on the game player. You just couldn't play them unless you put in a specific card. At least some of the time. Sometimes a different game would pop up instead, just randomly. Didn't matter which card you put in. There's 4 face buttons. Only one of them actually did anything. I guess the rest were just there for show. And to make this thing even more baffling, the face buttons and the directional pad would switch mapping randomly when you're playing the game, so
What?
it was essentially unplayable. I'm used to these bootleg handhelds being sloppy, but this was way beyond the usual jank. It's truly impressive how broken and worthless the Advanced Game Player is. And number 10 is the RDI Halcyon. One of the rarest consoles ever made, is also easily one of the worst, at least from a consumer perspective. Not much is actually known about the Halcyon's release. I'm not even sure if it was ever officially
Halcyon?
released anywhere, but it exists, and it's in the hands of a few dedicated collectors, so it must have proliferated somehow. Just look at some of the pictures of this thing. It's a beast. Released.
That's the whole
allegedly
thing?
Back in 1985. This thing was basically a computer and a Laserdisc player.
Oh, that's why, because it's a Laserdisc player.
It had voice recognition software, so the player could talk to the system, which was probably pretty mind-blowing back in 1985, but you know how inconsistent voice recognition is now in 2024?
That shit
As
probably
anytime I
$1,000.
use voice typing, it changes the
That shit
word
probably was
she
$1,000.
to you, which are not even vaguely similar words. That's now. We're talking about something that used voice commands back in 1985. Everything about this system was clunky, and that definitely includes the games, which had both a cartridge and a Laserdisc. The cartridge
Laserdisc was
contained
big as
game
fuck.
data, and the Laserdisc was the video. And yeah, only 2 games ever came out for it.
And
they
only
were
2
already
games?
Arcade games. I mean, at least this thing gave you one
This shit
other way
only
to
had 2
interact with
games.
the machine other than using voice. You could also use this really crappy looking membrane keyboard. So you get a giant, impossible to control brick of a console, all for the low price of an estimated $2,500.
I knew it was gonna be 1,000, but not 2 fucking thousand. Yo, dog.
Use this really crappy looking membrane keyboard. So you get a giant, impossible to control brick of a console, all for the low price of an estimated $2,500. Yeah,
Oh my
seriously,
God.
factoring in inflation, that's over $7,000 of today's money.
And there was only 2 games made for this shit. This is fucking crazy.
Which is just nuts for a video game console with 2 games and no proper controller. At number 9 is the Wireless Air 60. This is the bootleg console your grandparents buy when they want you to suffer or just, don't know anything. You know how bad and uncontrollable the Kinect was? Well, get ready for the Wireless Air 60.
Yo, this is a bootleg ass
They
Kinect.
had to have motion controls. There was no controller, not even a power cable. You have to
No
power it
way.
with 4 AAA batteries.
No
it doesn't
way.
actually do anything like the Kinect. It's probably got some
This is
extremely
terrible.
rudimentary motion tracking stuff that's going on, and that's really it.
This
But
is
that
terrible.
Doesn't make it any less unplayable. Games just apparently do whatever they want.
This
There's a
is
game called
fucking
Crash Zone that
terrible.
Just crashes the system. Guess I should have seen that one coming.
This
right?
is a fucking troll console.
Number 8 is the Mattel Hyperscan.
That is purely a scam.
2006, the Mattel Hyperscan tried to combine collectible cards with video games. Every one of the phone game quality discs.
Yo, I remember seeing commercials for
Very
this.
cheap, only around $20. But along with the game, kids could buy booster packs that were used to power up their games. I would call it the originator of the microtransaction, but Horse Armor came out a few months prior to the Hyperscan, so they were behind the times in more ways than one. One way they were definitely ahead of the curve, though, was pricing, which was ridiculous. Take the Ben 10 game, for example. The base game was $20. If you wanted to get all the cards, that was 13 booster packs, $10 a pop. So for the kids who had to have everything, a $20 game suddenly cost mom and dad $150 for one game. And the
Oh
games
my
aren't
God.
even good. Like, look at these. All the things released for this look like absolute crap. Everything looks like a cheap bootleg, but it was an official product from Mattel. And number 7 is the Atari Jaguar CD. The original Atari Jaguar had some redeeming features, but
Yeah, the Atari
not a lot.
Jaguar was some
Jaguar
bullshit.
CD, though, no reason for it to exist.
I heard a lot of
Released in
stories about the fucking
1995,
Atari
this thing only saw
Jaguar.
13
Honestly,
games.
all of Atari is a
Compared to the
fucking
standard
L.
Jaguar's 50, and most of the games released were stuff like Dragon's Lair.
They was letting Atari get away with so much
which
bullshit
got
back in the
released
day.
on other
And
systems.
niggas was actually
One
just
of the
playing their
Jaguar
games,
CD's
just
only
being
exclusives
amazed.
Was Highlander, The Last of the McClouds, which is a terrible tank control action.
Nigga,
game
Atari
based
was some
on the
fucking
Highlander
frauds.
cartoon that no one on earth remembers. Seriously, if you say you remember watching it, you're lying. I don't. I believe somebody played this terrible game over them watching the cartoon. It did not happen. Along with the limited library, it was also prone to hardware failure, and trying to get the CD working on one of them these days is pretty difficult. CD drives
Atari
tend to
was
be
like the
fine,
Hulk
but this
Hogan
thing
of
was
gaming.
much more shoddily made than your average one. Sometimes the connection between the system and the CD fails, sometimes the drive fails, sometimes the laser fails. There's no guessing what will cause it to stop working, but there's a good chance it will stop working. However, it would be a much bigger issue if there's anything worth playing on the system. And number 6 is the Nuon. This mostly forgotten console came out back in the year 2000. Cue Conan O'Brien bit. Had the goal of being nothing less than the next 3DO. They pretty much copied 3DO's manufacturing model exactly, only without the whole mandate that all games had to work with all versions of the console. So this thing somehow ended up being a bigger mess than the 3DO. It looks like a DVD player, because that's what it primarily was. It had special features to make the DVDs
Bro,
more
so you was just
interactive.
basically
Only 4
playing
movies ever
DVDs.
actually used them, and there were only 8 games ever out for the system.
You was just
Most of
literally
them were
playing
old,
DVDs.
or were only available packed with certain players, or were literally just incompatible with different models like Iron Soldier 3, which
That's
had
what
to be
all of it was
recalled
made
because
for.
of that. It's amazing that Logitech was able to survive as long as they did with controllers.
And
that looked this
Logitech
bad.
tried to pull
I
that
mean, look
bullshit
at this
off.
stupid-looking thing that
This
came packed with
controller
the
is
Nuon.
terrible.
It's just a standard Logitech from that time. But seriously, that's the kind of controller you'll force your friend to use.
This is one stick on this side. This is fucking bothering me. This is
while
ugly.
playing WWF No Mercy. Yeah, it's another in a long line of crappy forgotten consoles, but you'd think by 2000, somebody would have had a sanity check and canceled this pointless thing before it ever got on store shelves. Because, of course, it failed. And number 5 is Amiga CD32, Commodore's final attempt to break into the console market.
Here we go with these fraud-ass niggas, Commodore.
Saying something. Designed
Bro,
to break
who
into
the
the
fuck
video
is
game
these
market
niggas?
from its dying days. They got
Why
hit with
was
a
these niggas trying to get into the
$10 million
gaming industry?
infringement fine to the U.S. government, which forbade them from releasing products in the United States.
What? Wait, I'm sorry?
$10 million patent infringement fine to the U.S. government, which forbade them from releasing products in the United States until they paid up. They didn't have the money, of course, so they didn't release in the U.S., even though they already manufactured them, so they were stuck with a whole lot of products they mostly couldn't sell. This thing only lasted 8
Bro,
months before it was
yo.
being discontinued, and that's where Commodore's story mostly ended. If the console was some
Let
kind of
these
secret
niggas
gem,
get
it
these
would be
niggas outta
sad,
here, bro.
But, it's not. It's got all the same issues their previous attempts at a console had, but with even more unforced errors. Once again, it's essentially an outdated Commodore that doesn't really offer anything new for most of its library. Most of the games can be played elsewhere, and there was a whole lot of shovelware crap on the system like Kang Fu and the incredibly bad Akira movie adaptation game.
Kang Fu?
To be believed. I'm not joking here. Tetsu fights giant teddy bears. Giant teddy bears. At number 4 is the Tiger Gizmondo. This awkward little novelty is honestly a lot less interesting than the behind-the-scenes story behind its creation, but make no mistake, that doesn't mean it's good. The form factor alone killed the handheld. It's just too small and awkward to use as an actual game system. The top buttons are weird and dig in.
This is so fucking ugly, bro.
Spongy. Nothing feels good about using.
Imagine you wanted a fucking you wanted a PSP for Christmas, and your mom gets you this bullshit.
Came out for it. They were all launch titles. Nothing else was ever made for it. It only managed to sell around 25,000 units and was an all-around failure. The screen, at least, was all right, and the games looked okay for 2005 standards, but the whole thing ended up being a big pile of nothing. Well, okay, it was ahead of its time in one way. There were two models, an expensive one that cost $400 or a $229 model that would show you advertising all the time.
Hey, you would have got... Nah, she would... For Christmas, nigga, she would have got you the one with ads, dickhead. You would have had to sit through all that.
Now you're playing the device back in 2005. Maybe phone games were already doing that back then. I don't know, but either way, I don't like it. The Gizmondo sucked, but the real interesting story has to do with the sleazeball behind the whole project. A Swedish game developer and former mob affiliate, Stefan Eriksson. The story of what this guy got up to before and around the development of the Gizmondo is pretty much, and he ended up getting arrested and pleaded embezzlement and one count of illegal gun possession, which then he was deported to Sweden, where he faced even more charges, including aggravated assault and drug possession. Wild stuff.
Wait, I'm sorry. What? The founder of this... I'm sorry?
The story has to do with the sleazeball behind the whole project. A Swedish game developer and former mob affiliate, Stefan Eriksson. The story of what this guy got up to before and around the development of the Gizmondo is pretty nuts, and he ended up getting arrested and pleading guilty for 2 counts of embezzlement and 1 count of illegal gun possession, spending 3 years in U.S. jail, which then he was deported to Sweden, where he faced even more charges, including aggravated assault and drug possession.
What? Yo,
number 3,
what?
Max. This 1987
what,
really
bro?
Stretches the definition of what counts as a video game. It's a light gun game.
What is... Yo, I feel like I'm gonna say that shit to every fucking console they show. Bro, what is this?
And all you get is a toy gun. If you want to play the games, you need a VHS player. Because seriously, all the games for this thing are just tapes. So it's not really
tapes.
A game. Nothing on the screen actually reacts to what you're doing. You might as well be doing finger guns on your computer screen because that's only...
So you're not really playing anything. You're not playing anything. You're just watching it.
Died a quick death. Because what's the point? I guess you get a score, but it doesn't even show up on the screen. It appears on the TV-mounted score signal. So seriously, all you're doing is watching.
Bro, they was scamming niggas back in the day with these consoles, bro. They were scamming niggas.
And number 2 is the LJN Video Art. It's a console with one game, a terrible paint program that doesn't even have a tablet interface. You have to use a joystick to draw, and oof, that is not good. It only had 16 colors, and putting in a cartridge into the slot made the picture appear that you could edit using some of the worst controls imaginable.
Bro, what?
It is a basic and ugly paint program with 16 colors.
Yes,
16 colors. The pre-programmed images even look amateurish. I'm pretty sure a child could draw something better than this. As a digital art program, completely worthless. Not fun to use. Serves no
this shit is ass.
And finally, at number 1 is the R-Zone. And I've already made...
The R-Zone.
But it's been long enough.
The R-Zone.
Guys, step into the R-Zone. If you grew up in the 90s, then you remember all those cheap Tiger Electronics games and being able to say the R word. The Tiger Electronics games, sucked pretty hard. They were basically unplayable with nonsense controls, inexplicable rules, and indecipherable artwork, but they were everywhere. All the kids had them because they were real cheap. Now, imagine one of those things combined with the Virtual Boy, and you have the worst handheld console of all time. Look at it. It's literally one of those Tiger handhelds, but red and projected.
First of all, the R-Zone is a wild name. That is a wild fucking name, bro. Not gonna hold
piece
you.
of glass in front of your eye. There's no actual graphics on it. It's all just a single image, and certain parts light up to give the impression of movement or action. Nobody's falling for it, though. It's usually just a mess of black blobs twitching about the screen. Now imagine that, only it's red, projected on some clear plastic, and you can only see it. See it might be a bit of an exaggeration, too, but you can only see it with one eye. In a technical sense, it's not even a video console. There's no video signals generated here. But what the hell? Wikipedia says it counts, so that's good enough for me. Tiger Electronics handhelds are about as primitive as video games can get. And the R-Zone somehow found a way to make it worse. That's all for today. Leave us a comment.
This list was funny as shit. This shit had me in tears. Because they was really getting away with some shit back in the day. They was really scamming niggas, yo. That's crazy. And it was no Soldier console on this shit. That's even wild. They show all them bootleg consoles, but they didn't show the Soldier console.